Welcome to the Whole Child Sleep podcast, where we help families nurture dreams and raise wholeness. Welcome, everyone, to the Whole Child Sleep podcast. I am your host, Maya Hartzheim. Today, we have McCall Gordon. McCall is a certified general sleep coach and has a master's degree in psychology and mental health from Antioch University and has a bachelor's in human biology from Stanford University. Her specialty is working with parents of young children who are intense, alert, sensitive, persistent, and never ever want to sleep. McCall, thank you so much for joining. If you don't mind, we'll just go ahead and jump in. And I want to ask you, could you tell us where you started in your career and how you became involved in infant mental health?
Yeah, sure. So my kids are now adults, essentially. I can't even hardly say young adults anymore. They're in their 20s. And so back then, the internet really wasn't even a thing. So it was mostly magazines and books is where you got your information. And my daughter was a long, hard labor, and she had colic, and I was on my own, meaning I didn't have a lot of other mom friends. And uh, so I was reading a lot, and um, I just was really struggling, like a lot. We were doing the whole attachment parenting thing. We had gotten the baby book. It made a lot of sense to us. And the book, I mean, bless Dr. Sears, met him, know him, like him. But at the time, there was a little bit of like, oh, if you just do these things, everything will be so much better. And I just don't know that that was true for us, right? So we were doing all the things, and my daughter, was still just really struggling. I look back now and I think she had reflux, but back then they didn't know about reflux. So we could have stood on our heads and she wouldn't have really felt much better, right? But I was just really struggling, and the advice that was out there just wasn't helping. It was literally either you crying it out, or I say gut it out, meaning just go with the flow until it gets better. I honestly knew that we couldn't do crying it out. I couldn't do it myself as a sensitive person. I knew she would cry for hours and hours, and I couldn't do that. And so we were left just like gutting it out. And I honestly can't recommend that either, because I wasn't a good mom on a lot of days. I was really exhausted and frustrated. All of So I was looking at the magazines that kept recommending crying it out as the only approach. And the age for it started getting younger and younger and younger. And I kept thinking, wow, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But there must be research. There must be research. They must research this. And the more I went forward, the bigger the question got for me. So I essentially went to graduate school to answer that question, to see what they had actually said. So I really crafted my own master's program in what they call applied psychology. So it's not clinical necessarily, but I took a lot of clinical classes, and I created sort of a research-based master's program in emotional regulation and attachment and sleep and parenting stuff. And so that's really how I kind of got on this path in the first place. And then sleep coaching was kind of a natural outgrowth of some of that. It's been a long road.
You are such a powerful voice in the community of general sleep coaches. And I'm so grateful that you have dived in to help all of us just have a deeper grasp of infant mental health understanding as it relates to sleep coaching.
I mean, it's infant mental health for sure, but it's also, I think my main focus is sort of deconstructing. I won't say debunking, deconstructing what gets said about sleep training, especially when people say, well, the research says, because it's an awful lot like the Emperor's New Clothes, right? The more you look, the less you see. And it's amazing how research gets used to influence people. And when you really look at what people are referring to, it's really stunning. And I keep thinking somebody else is going to come. I mean, 20 years ago or more, I thought, oh, someone else will please, someone else has got to be on this, right? Somebody else has to have figured this out. And I'm still, and there was one night where I was like, wow, what if it's me? What if I'm the only one? And it's still a little bit the case. I'm really shocked that some of this stuff is still out there in the world.
Yeah, I agree. So you mentioned Dr. Sears, and my mom was an avid attachment parenting mom as well, and she passed that on to me. So it's like it's deep in our roots as well. So could you tell me a little bit more about that? How you went from could you share your experience with attachment parenting and how it shaped your approach to sleep coaching? Because you are a general sleep coach now.
I mean, it just made sense to us because for a variety of reasons. And we did co-sleep with both kids. With my daughter, it worked pretty well once she got to a certain age. It worked pretty well. And when she was 2.5, well, when she was probably 19 months or something like that, maybe younger, I don't remember, amnesia. I got pregnant with my son, and we moved her to a twin bed beside our bed. So she wasn't even 2 yet, but we kind of just made the bed bigger. And then we moved when she was 2.5, and we said, okay, where do you want your bed to be? Do you want it in our room, or do you want it right over here in your new room? And she basically said, in my room. And that was it. That was it. End of story. She just never, ever wanted to come back. Really, it was a little shock. My son was a little tougher, and he did not sleep as well when we were co-sleeping. So he was waking up every 45 minutes. And now looking back, I think both he and I are very light sleepers. And I just think we kept each other awake. I think if I had had a middle of the road approach, he would have been way better on his own surface, in his own space. And white noise wasn't a thing. We both could have used white noise so much. So I think I learned about that there's not, there's no, this sounds trite, there's no one answer for everybody. And neither co-sleep, crying it out doesn't work obviously for everybody, but co-sleeping doesn't work for everybody either. And I also learned that, some of that was coming at a great cost to me. And that's not okay either. Like, I really did this thing of like, no, this is all about the kids. I'm following their cues. I'm just going to keep following their cues no matter what. And I joke around and say, I followed their cues right off a cliff. I mean, I was not in good shape on some days. And so I think I learned that a middle of the road approach is what we need. And that's what I got from Kim, which is it's not crying it out, but it's also not just letting things run wild. And for some kids, especially these intense little live wires, you really have to craft an approach makes sense for both the child and the parent. And again, there's no one context that works great for everybody. And I think I learned that from my 2 kids.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience, because I feel like even now with so much more information out there, we still struggle with what is the right way for us, and like, is it just cry it out, or is it just, grinding it out? So yeah.
Live with it. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, people still think sleep training is equated with Ferber, and it drives me bananas. I do have to say, we actually went and met Dr. Sears. I've met him since, but when my daughter was like 5 months old, his office was maybe a third of a mile from my parents' house. So we just made an appointment, and we basically went in and we were like, what the heck? We're doing all the stuff. Where's the promises, Dr. Bill? Like, what the heck? And well, he basically said, oh, by the way, I'm right in the middle of writing this book called The Fussy Baby Book, because, I'm sure you've read about Hayden, right? He had 5 children, and then he had what was probably a live wire. And he was like, oh, hey, this stuff doesn't work the same. And, and, uh, and he was writing the book. So he asked me if I wanted to contribute anecdotes. I sometimes joke and say I helped write the Fussy Baby book because we were we were really lost. So, and I think he's the first to say, and he gets, misquoted and misconstrued all the time, but he says himself, and certainly his wife says, if you start feeling resentful or you start feeling exhausted, then you need to dial back, right? Like, this, it's all gotten so bent out of shape how people interpret adaptive parenting is too bad. Like, oh, you're never allowed to put your kid down. Dumb. So anyway, I just think a middle ground approach that can be adaptable to people is where we need to go. And sleep training isn't rocket science. It's really not. It's actually very, very, very simple. And I tell parents, you could pretty much craft your own method if you want. This idea that there's a bunch of different separate methods out there isn't really true. It's all one idea, and people are just marketing it differently.
So from your experience with research, your personal experience as well, and working with families, what are some key learnings that have led you to feel aligned with general sleep coaching? You kind of alluded to that just now, but do you have anything else to share on that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, totally. If I had to boil it down to one big one, it's that I think the whole concept of self-soothing has gotten completely warped out of all shape. The idea that a baby can be screaming in their crib by themselves and go to sleep, and that's teaching them self-soothing it's false. And really, it's not. In no way, shape, or form is that true. We have no proof that falling asleep after crying vigorously is self-soothing. We have to think of what is self-soothing. Self-soothing means you can do something for yourself to feel better. Falling asleep is not necessarily self-soothing. Now, if a baby was crying and then calmed down because they were sucking their hand, then fell asleep, maybe we would have a different conversation. But the younger the baby, the fewer capacities they have to be able to self-soothe. And they can only self-soothe from a manageable amount of frustration. I use this analogy. I say, if I handed you a 10-pound bag or a 20-pound bag of sugar, you could hold it for a while. You could manage it. And after a little bit, it might get heavy, but you'd be okay. If I gave you a 100-pound bag of sugar, you wouldn't be able to hold it very long because it would outstrip what your muscles were prepped for. Unless you're a weightlifter. But if you're just a regular person, you're going to drop that bag of sugar very quickly because it's too much for you. It's the same with children. We give them distress that is bigger than their developmental capacity. We're overloading their circuits, and there's no way they can self-soothe from that. So then what we might be seeing is withdrawal from something that is intolerable for them. So the whole idea behind gradual sleep coaching is that you're scaffolding those skills. It's like how we teach a kid to ride a bike. We don't hand them a two-wheeler and say, good luck with that. I'll be over here. I can't help you or you'll never learn. We hold on so they get the hang of what that feels like. And then when they get the hang of it, we start gradually letting go, but we're still right there in case the bike tips over. We're not going to hold on to the bike forever. We're going to let the kid bike. So I think that the gradual approach to sleep coaching is the same. We're saying, look, I'm here for you. I'm going to get you if you get too upset. I'm here for you, but you're going to do the work. That's my compromise, is I'll be here for you, but I'm going to help you gain these skills gradually over time. And we never let them get blown out of the water. I think that's absolutely critical. So I think that's absolutely key. So that, and it's what separates it from all the other sleep coaching techniques, which place value on the child being by themselves without help. And in fact, stigmatizes a parent for helping, right? So they say, don't pick up the baby. Whatever you do, soothe them in the crib. Don't pick them up. I just think it's bananas. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think it makes sense from a developmental standpoint or a neurological standpoint. And especially some of those methods that are saying you can do this stuff to very, very, very young babies.
So considering all the research, your knowledge and experience, what is the most important message you would like to give parents about infant sleep?
Oh gosh, there's several. One is, don't let anybody tell you what's a problem, right? And this idea that the longer you wait, the harder it will be. First of all, there is literally no research on that. Not one researcher has ever examined that question. That idea there is largely made up. There's no evidence that it's harder if you wait. It's just a pattern that you can change whenever you feel ready to change it. So I say parents get to decide what's a problem and what's not a problem. The second thing is pick something that makes sense to you. Don't feel like, oh, I just have to grit my teeth and it'll be over, because sleep training has to be redone. I've had people who are like, wait, I barely made it through the first time. You mean I have to do it again? They're shocked because all that information does this big, hard sell on crying it out, right? They say, oh, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be so fast and then it'll be over and everything will be great. Well, first, it's not always 3 days and it's over. Almost never. And second, you have to redo it. So pick something that resonates, because you're going to have to live with it for a while. And in that vein, there are options. You don't have to do Ferber. You really don't, if you don't want to. Lots of people do it, and it is quick and it's relatively painless for everybody. Really, I get that. But those are usually mellow kids. You could do anything with them. The more intense the child, the more you got to really choose your battles.
On that note, what are some common misconceptions or myths about sleep that you often encounter? And can you go ahead and debunk those for our listeners?
Yeah, well, we've done a couple of them, right? Like, one is, oh, if you wait, it'll be harder. No. That you have to start at 3 months. There's virtually no research on using crying it out in babies under 6 months at all. We don't know anything about it. So I usually tell parents, just don't. I wouldn't start at 3 to 4 months. I just wouldn't. There is so much development going on, and we don't know the effect of certain amounts of crying on brain development at that age. We literally don't. Other myths. What I say about crying it out is that they always say it's quick, easy, and effective. It's not always quick. Even in research, it took weeks. It's not easy for parents. We know that. Parents hate it. And often researchers and others have to talk parents into using it. I'm like, why do you have to talk them into it? If it was so great, like, you wouldn't have to talk them into it. The other thing is that it's uniformly effective, and that if not effective, you just did it wrong. Even in research, extinction, crying it out, didn't work for between 25 and 50% of the samples in the study. 25 to 50% across studies. So remember, here's a good little research tidbit. Research deals in averages. So if on average, crying it out moved the needle somewhat on sleep, they can say it was effective. Blanket. They don't have to say it resulted in a half hour more sleep. Yay. Who's going to want to do crying it out for 20 minutes more nighttime sleep? Right? They don't tell you that. They don't, and they also don't say, well, it was really effective for 50% of the people. That means it didn't work for half of the people in the study. So who are those people, right? There's a lot when you really dig into like, what's effective? It does not mean that those children were sleeping through the night in a week. Absolutely never, not once, not in one study is that what it meant. Studies have to deal with significant improvements, and significance is statistical. So in one study, for example, statistical significance equated to 1 of a waking less in the intervention group. A half of a waking. Like, what is even the point? So again, I know we have these results from research, and then it gets interpreted by people who say, oh, well, research has shown that it's effective. And parents think effective is, oh, in 3 days or 4 days, my baby will be sleeping through the night forever. Well, and then those parents, when they experience real life, are like, what am I doing wrong? They never say, what's the matter with the research? Because they aren't told. They're saying, oh, wait, my baby's supposed to be sleeping through the night and they're not. What's the matter with them? And that's the effect that I see talking to parents all the time, is the blame goes to them because they're trying to hit this bar that is not a real thing. It's not attainable, but it's also not even real. Like even in the studies, that's not what happened. So part of my sort of platform is to get people to start really talking about the reality of sleep training, effectiveness, and timeline, and giving parents an actual sense of what we know, not just this big, well, research says, right? In terms of things like negative side effects of crying it out, when people say there's never been any evidence that there's ever a problem. Well, that's true, but you have to look at how it was looked at in the research, right? So a lot of times it was, older babies, it was, toddlers, and they looked at it in really weird ways. This is not to say that there are horrid repercussions of crying it out. For most kids, probably not. But we've taken, it's like you're looking for your keys, and you look in the kitchen and you look around and your keys aren't there. So you say, my keys are gone. There's no evidence that my keys are anywhere in my house. Well, you only looked in the kitchen. You didn't look in all the other parts of the house. It's a little bit like that. So research is a little bit kind of going, are there any negative effects? I don't know. I can't see any negative effect, right? Like they're not really looking. And because most kids in a study didn't have effects, we don't know that some kids in that study didn't have effects. We really don't, right? Because remember, it's on average. My question is, are there ages where there might be effects? Are there amounts of crying? Because a lot of these studies that looked at it, they don't say how much did those kids cry. So we don't know. In that study, was 15 minutes without effect, an hour and a half? What happens if a kid cries for an hour and a half for 5 solid nights? Is that bad? Like, we don't know. And it's almost like there's been such I don't know. It's not even motivation. It's like a push to say it's okay, that they're not really asking the questions. It's like research has asked and answered it, and now nobody wants to look at it anymore. There was just an article on pop sugar. Well, actually, it was a while ago. That was like, if you don't want to do Ferber crying it out, here are 4 other methods. Well, the funny thing is 2 of those methods are crying it out. So I don't understand article. But they quoted somebody who said, there's never been any evidence that there are negative side effects. In fact, some research has shown that it has improved attachment to the parents. Well, first of all, you cannot improve attachment. right? Unless the child went from insecure to secure. That has not happened. Never. There's only a couple of studies that have looked at effects on attachment. And in both studies, they did not do a baseline. They only measured attachment at the end. And in one of those two studies, okay, hold on to your hat. In one of those two studies, they only measured attachment using something called disinhibited attachment, like whatever, scale. And I was like, disinhibited attachment? What is that? And I had to really, really look it up. Disinhibited attachment happens in like Romanian orphans who have been severely neglected. These are the kids that'll like run up to a stranger and say, take me home, right? They'll indiscriminately run to adults. So this study basically said, well, the kids who had crying it out didn't have disinhibited attachment, so it didn't impact attachment. What? It's like if you went in for a COVID test and they tested you for cancer and they said, oh, you don't have cancer, so you're fine. Like, what? It doesn't make sense. But this is how this stuff is measured. So it's really important to know exactly what the research says on some of these topics, because parents are getting a whole different story. All right. That was a very long answer to a very short question.
No, that was amazing. And just for some listeners, some parents associate any crying as cry it out. So do you want to clarify what cry it out is?
Okay. Yes, please. We're going to circle back to the point about it matters how much crying and in what context. We do know that a baby crying in the presence of a parent is less physiologically and behaviorally stressful for a kid. We know that. So it's called social buffering. It's like when you are holding your child as they get a shot. They're still going to cry, but it's way better than if they're in that room by themselves with the doctor. So, all crying by itself is not stressful. If somebody, it's how much crying for how long, and do they have support while it. When we say crying it out, that is kind of used a little loosely to mean a bunch of different things. For some people, it only means that cold turkey where you put the baby in the room and you don't go back in at all. Others, it's also fervor where you leave the room and come back and leave the room and come back. We have to remember that there are lots of kids, mostly very mellow, easygoing, who parents will say, yeah, we did fervor. The first night they cried a max of 15 minutes. The next night it was like 10 minutes. The third night they just went right to sleep. Like, I honestly can't argue with that 15 minutes of crying and especially if the baby's old enough. Okay, cool for you. The kids that I see, the parents are like, yeah, they cried for 3 hours the first night and then 2 hours the next night and then 3 hours. And I'm like, no, stop. That is too stressful for everybody. That's not working for this kid. And we, like I said, I also want to help parents know that if you did that and that's what happened, please don't, beat yourself up. Like, yeah, it's not, you didn't wreck anything. You didn't ruin anybody. And especially if you called it, right? So kids, especially in a, an otherwise, stable, loving context are going to be fine. I just don't feel like we need to put parents through this unnecessarily. Again, there are going to be people who will never do this, and there's going to be people who do it and it's easy and it's fine. It's all those people in the middle who are like, the ones I worry about are ones that are like, I'm really suffering. I guess I have to do crying it out. Okay, I'm going to do it. And then they do it and then they feel horrid about it. It's those people that I really want to reach. And you don't have to do that. I do want to say too, that there's really no way to change a child's behavior in a no cry context, especially if you've got a bright, alert little kid. There's nothing you can do that they're not going to notice. I think parents, especially when they're tired, they start getting a little magical thinking of like, well, maybe this will just go away. Or maybe there's something I can do. I can just kind of sneak it in there and suddenly they'll sleep and they won't even have to cry. And I think you and I know that's just never the case. You're going to have to change something. They're going to notice. They're going to tell you they hate it or don't understand it first. If you can be empathetic and still keep moving, they will pick up what you're laying down and they'll get it. They'll get it. But I know probably you have too seen lots of folks who said, no, I tried sleep coaching one night and it was horrible. So we stopped. And I'm like, oh, but the second night probably would have been better.
Thank you so much for speaking the truth and helping us better understand the middle ground where I feel like most people would fall into. And again, just helping people know that they have options.
They do have options. And here's the thing. I really also want to tell parents, don't let people say, oh, well, it's the most effective, crying it out. It's not the most effective. Head to head, nothing works better than anything else. It's just that crying it out has been the most researched. That does not mean it's the best. There's a real, in research, people want to jump on a train that's already moving rather than start a new one. And so it's better for them to jump on this pile of research on extinction than it is to ask different questions. So the alternatives are less well researched. It does not mean they're less effective. It just means that researchers haven't done that work, unfortunately. Now, there are a few researchers that have. Sarah Blunden out of Australia is doing a lot on a gradual approach that's like basically like Kim's approach. She calls it a responsive approach. And she did compare it head to head with extinction and found that both worked. But the responsive approach did result in less stress for the parent and for the baby, ultimately. So that's really promising. And the more we get those kinds of results, maybe the more people will start on that train as well.
Amazing. Yes, fingers crossed. I know everybody, just like myself, wants to hear more from you. So good news. She's coming back on the podcast. So stay tuned for that. She's coming back and she's going to give us a bit of insight on her book that's coming out, which I am really excited about. And do you want to tell everybody a little bit about it?
Sure. It's called Why Won't You Sleep? And the subtitle is A Game-Changing Approach for Exhausted Parents of Nonstop, Super Alert, Big Feeling Kids. So it's basically focusing on sleep and parenting kids who are like my daughter was, and my son, truthfully, who just are a little out of the box. And so this is about how to tailor this responsive approach to set everybody up for success. But there's also stuff in there about, of course, about temperament, but also about the parent's journey and what that's like and support for them. Because usually they are wiped out. And so hopefully it'll give them a little boost. But that's coming out in next November.
Yeah. Mark your calendars, everyone. What a needed resource. So that's incredible. Thank you again, McCall. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Please send over your questions and I will talk to you all next week. Thank you for listening to the Whole Child Sleep podcast. For references to articles discussed in this podcast or for evidence on the topics that we've discussed on this podcast, please look in the description below, or you can find the articles linked in our blog at curesleep.us. I want to give you an idea of what you can expect in terms of structure of this podcast moving forward. You can expect one podcast a week, and we will cover a topic for 2 weeks. The first week, you can expect the podcast to be more educational and informational. The following week will be more of a Q&A covering the same topic. If you have a question that you would like us to answer during the Q&A podcast, please send them in at 406-551-4083. And if you've found this podcast to be helpful, we ask that you share it. We would love to reach more tired families. We also ask that you subscribe and like and give us a 5-star review. This also helps us reach more tired families. We hope you have a beautiful day, and we will talk to you next week. By listening to this podcast, you understand and agree to the following. The content of this podcast offers the opinions of Meyer Hartzheim and her guests, and it is not intended as medical advice. It serves as an informational purpose. For personalized and medical concerns, consult your healthcare professional. The views and opinions in this podcast are our own and don't represent our employees or affiliates. The views of the guests in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect that of Cure Sleep Group. Our podcast and website are not for legal purposes, such as establishing a standard of care or expert witness testimony. We don't guarantee the accuracy of statements or opinions. We appreciate your assistance in maintaining content accuracy. If you find errors in our podcast or blogs, please reach out via email to support@curesleep.us. This podcast is owned by Cure Sleep LLC and presented by the Whole Child Sleep Podcast. Thank you for tuning in.